reads on.
Now, the government must fix the dire in quotation marks, justice system to make the overhaul of sentencing work. Those are the words of former Home Secretary Lord Blunkett. He says the Prime Minister's plans to punish low-level criminals such as burglars, thieves and drunk drivers with community sentences rather than putting them in overcrowded jails would fail unless there was a rethink to strengthen alternatives to prison.
Yes, joining us now is former prison governor Rona Hotchkiss. Morning, Rona. Essentially, this comes down to the fact that there aren't enough prison spaces for convicts, hence why the government wants to turn to community sentences, at least for those who would be sentenced to 12 months and under. Excuse me for being a little simple, but why can't we just build more prisons?
So, yes, that is one option. It's actually the Tory government's preferred option. It's just that the cost of it is prohibitive. It costs hundreds of millions to build the kind of prisons that the Tories are talking about. In fact, they had a plan to increase capacity by about 20,000 in the next 5 years. But you're talking a couple of billion to do that. So they're having to look at alternatives. Now, the thing is that the alternatives to prison aren't really that much cheaper when you take all of the factors into account. Why alternatives to prison are better is because prison doesn't work for the vast majority of these lower level crime people who commit crime. So on the surface, you would think, well, this is a good thing, keeping people out of prison. But unless it's fully funded, Lord Blunkett is quite right, it will not work.
And when we hear that prisons are pushed to breaking point, is that your experience? Just tell a bit about your experience of working as a prison governor. Paint a picture for us as to what it was like.
Sure. So in general, the prison system in Scotland isn't quite as overcrowded as the prison system in England and Wales. But what happens when you have an overcrowded prison is tension rises, assaults rise, it becomes more dangerous for staff, and it becomes nigh on impossible to do the kind of things that we know do help with rehabilitation. So interventions with prisoners, helping them with drug issues, training them for work and so on. These things become impossible in overcrowded prisons where the best thing, all you can do is feed people and perhaps let them out for an hour a day.
So was that your experience, that prisoners were locked up for 23 hours a day? And if that was the case, how on earth does that help their rehabilitation?
Well, it doesn't. To be fair, when I worked in the Scottish Prison Service, no one was locked up for 23 hours a day. But I know that that's what it can revert to when prisons get extremely busy. And I think that's where prisons in England and Wales are at the moment, and prisons in Scotland are heading towards that. So, yes, it means that they do nothing but sit in their cell watching the television, whatever it may be. There's a legal requirement to let people out for fresh air for at least an hour a day, and they do get out for picking up their meals and all that kind of thing. And in prisons where they don't have in-cell sanitation, they get out for showers and so on. So it's very, very rarely 23 hours a day, but it can be as much as 18 or 20, and that's good for no one.
Rona, this concept of community justice, where it partly involves convicts saying sorry and apologising and writing letters to their victims. In your opinion, as a former prison officer, does this kind of scheme work? I mean, is prison not just the only option available?
Well, that's restorative justice you're talking about. That's when a prisoner or someone who's offended agrees to apologise and try and make good with the people they've offended against, and all parties must consent to. There's some evidence that works for some people. That can happen from prison as well. It doesn't just have to happen with community sentences. But the main point is that community sentences need to be properly funded. They're quite intense when they work well. And they can work for low-level crime. Part of the devil of this would be in the detail, because what crimes does the Tory government consider low level? If it includes, for example, rapists, child abusers and so on, then I dare say the public, and I would agree with them, would be completely opposed to that. If it includes other crimes, what are called acquisitive crimes, crimes of theft and so on, then yes, certainly I don't think prison's the right place for that. Now, that's not to minimise the chaos that low-level crime can cost in local communities, so we mustn't dismiss discard that. Those kind of crimes can cause misery in people's lives. But the community option is not a cheap option. It will not work if you don't fund it.
And if you, with this community sentencing, that obviously involves the probation service. What's their caseload like? Do they have the capacity to deal with the extra number of offenders that would be in the community and not going to prison?
No, they don't, because that would suggest that they're sitting around doing nothing just now. If you suddenly lop, I don't know, 20,000 prisoners off the current numbers in prison and put them in the community, of course the probation service and the social work that do it in Scotland couldn't cope with that. They're underfunded now. That's what I mean. And to do this, the government would face having to run parallel funding for about 5 years, because it'll only be cheaper if you can move resources away from prison. And that can't happen overnight. So there would have to be a massive investment in this. And I don't see any mention of that happening.
OK, Rona Hotchkiss, former prison governor, thank you so much for your time.